In the last few moments, Manchester City have been charged by the Premier League with numerous breaches of financial rules following a lengthy 4-year investigation. Now, I have this in front of me, Simon, as you no doubt do too.
Yeah, Martin Ziegler.
Martin Ziegler of the Times, who's in this very building, is working on this as we speak. If we can get a word with Martin, we will. Yeah. But he is submerged, of course, in paperwork right now. In respect of each of the seasons, 2009-10 to 2017-18 inclusive, the Premier League rules applicable in those seasons that required provision by a member club to the Premier League in the utmost good faith of accurate financial information that gives a true and fair view of the club's financial position, in particular with respect to its revenue, including sponsorship revenue, its related parties and its operating costs, namely. And then the list goes on. That various rules come into play here, Simon. And the list, I mean, we now have the paperwork in front of us. To say the rap sheet is extensive is putting it mildly. It's a 10-year period, Simon. I'll break this down with a very simple question to you. How much trouble are City in here?
Well, one must remember these are charges, not allegations, and they have to be answered by Manchester City. Pep started this process last week and laid the seeds, because they obviously knew this was coming, by suggesting that there were X amount of clubs inside the Premier League that wanted Man City banned. So when we heard Pep saying that last week, people were wondering, why are you bringing this up in this conversation? Because we talked about Chelsea. This would be the reason why. Look, Man City have got these allegations and these charges to answer. I didn't think the Premier League would have the balls to do it. Whether they have the balls to make it stick is a different matter. This notion that somehow Manchester City were exonerated by the Court of Arbitration of Sport is a myth. It was about time exclusions and about CAS's burden of obligation, and the time limits around certain information being provided to Court of Arbitration of Sport precluded that from being included in the so-called exoneration of Manchester City. I have always maintained that they have significant questions to answer, and this idea that people are xenophobic or have an issue with Man City because the ownership model is not an ownership model that people like because of its persuasion or its ethnicity is nonsense. Yeah. It's about the idea that there is an element of financial doping that is going on.
What do you mean by that?
Well, by that I mean that it's been clearly evidenced that they've used inherent businesses that they own to be able to artificially inflate sponsorship deals that have given them an opportunity to fall within the confines of financial fair play.
And that's the allegation here.
And that is, well, there's a lot of allegations here, and it's over a 10-year period.
Yeah.
Now, you know, the idea that people find quite repugnant, and I've always found repugnant, is the notion that Manchester City can allude or assert that they will tie up every single governing body in sport for tens of years, given the financial muscle they've got and the legal recourse they've got for using that financial muscle. I've always found repugnant. I hope that the transparency of the situation comes to the fore, and people that do wrong, whether they're Crystal Palace or Manchester City, are consequence for it. This is quite a comprehensive scenario where you've been investigating for 4 years. You've got 10 seasons before Man City changed their direction and started to trade players. Yeah. We see a difference in Man City in the last couple of years because they've traded players for a profit. Previously, they did not. And they didn't have the revenue, in my view, to be able to compete with financial fair play. They're not the only club to have this question to answer. You know, with greatest respect to Nasser Al-Khelaifi, I think PSG have questions to answer as well. But the point here is that the Premier League have surprised me. Whether this has the teeth that on paper it looks like, whether they're going to take it to its natural conclusion and really push hard, and whether they're going to get rid of conspiracy theories like people like Pep Guardiola positioned last week that 9 football clubs wanted Man City booted out of the league and all that sort of stuff, is a different question. But what it does is it puts the cat amongst the pigeons now, doesn't it, in the Premier League?
Well, when you look at the number of charges, Simon, you can appreciate why it took 4 years to get this together. It dates back to 2009-10, and judging from what I see in front of me, the last season they're looking at closely is 2017-18.
They all seem to be the same breaches as well. There's a consistent theme of, I don't have the breach details to hand, but if you've got E3, 4 and 11, E3, 4 and 11, E3, 4, every season, that's a particular rule that they appear to have pushed up and over against. Yeah. Because it is a significant thing. If you're going to charge a member club, don't forget the Premier League is the sum of 20 clubs. It's really the clubs that run the Premier League, with Richard Masters running it for them. But it's the Premier League is run by the clubs. So for the Premier League to turn on itself and go after one of its members shows that it wants to be a transparent league and make sure that it operates at the highest level.
Yeah.
But it's also rather commendable. We'll see if it sticks, and we'll see if they've got the traction.
Commendable on the Premier League's part.
Well, it must be, mustn't it?
To be digging this much.
Well, it must be.
If they're found guilty of these charges, what are we looking at?
Or a variety of things. What we don't want to be looking at is financial consequences, because that's not difficult for Man City to overcome, is it?
Points deduction.
Well, I would like to think if they're guilty of the things that they're being charged, like any other football club, they get the ultimate consequences. That means points. That means the consideration of what division they play in. It means the whole Rubicon being crossed and saying, right, we either mean it or we don't. They'll have a menu of consequences. The last one we want to see is Man City get a £50 million fine. They couldn't care less about a £50 million fine.
And when you say consideration of what division they play in, are you talking about them being kicked out of the Premier League?
I'm talking about the consequences of their behaviour over a 10-year period. If they're found guilty of 10 years worth of financial misrepresentation, what do you think that looks like? What do you think that means?
Yeah.
It should mean something significant, shouldn't it?
Well, just to reiterate, it dates back from 2009-10 all the way through to 2017-18. And now, as Simon is saying, what could this lead to? These are charges, we stress. These are charges, Premier League charges at this stage. But what could it lead to? A fine? Well, Manchester City, as Simon rightly says, could pay any fine in their stride. A points deduction? Well, how many points would that be? And I'm looking at the messages coming in, Simon. Many messages coming in now. If you want to join them, you can. 81089. There's one probably, I'm more than certain, not a Manchester City fan. Cheating is cheating. Might they be stripped of their title?
What will be fascinating?
Might they be?
What will be fascinating? Well, I don't know about that. That's based upon the allegation sticking.
Of course.
What is fascinating to hear will be see Man City fans now that piled in 2 years ago when they were laughably cleared from UEFA because of time restrictions and not necessarily a lack of guilt.
Yeah.
Not a Man City fan on the switchboard. Be interesting to see if anyone phones in to correct the position or to give us an alternate view on Man City's position right now. Yeah.
Well, as you might not be surprised to hear, we have contacted Manchester City. We await to hear what they will say. Obviously, one would expect they'll put out some kind of a holding statement. But in the last few moments, this Monday morning, Manchester City, who lose at Tottenham at the weekend, and now this morning, more bad news. But it's bad news of another kind that could have a major impact on the football club. Manchester City have been charged by the Premier League with numerous breaches of financial rules following what was a 4-year investigation. Unprecedented, yes. But what will the punishment be if indeed they are found to be guilty of any of the charges made against them? Many people getting in touch now. Cheating is cheating, cheating is cheating. Mm-hmm. We don't know if they've been cheating. But what would the punishment be? And I'm being asked constantly by hundreds of people to ask you, how bad might it get for them?
Well, I mean, ultimately, there's a lot going on here. And I think one of the manoeuvres that's being put into play is the Premier League will be utilising this piece of information to be able to push back against the notion that independent regulation is required. And they'll use it as a case. Now, Man City have got themselves caught in a real cleft position now because the timing of this, against the backdrop of an independent regulator and the Premier League saying, no, we can clean our own house, means they're going to clean house here. And what it could mean is significant for Man City. What it shouldn't mean, look, on the menu of punishments will be a list of things that they can do, sentencing, guidelines. So underneath the auspice of that, it'll range from points to finances, potentially to looking at their historic achievements. I don't think they'll have priced in historic achievements as being taken off the table. But what they are now is in an eye of a storm. And because of the timing of it, this bluster that Man City's board will have, which is that we can tie people up in knots forever and a day and we've got more money than you know what to do with, and we can use our legal team, is not going to stick here. This is going to be played out in the court of public opinion now. And it's going to be played out in the public domain, not behind the closed doors of an enclave in Switzerland where people don't get to see what's going on. This is going to be dragged kicking and screaming here now. And for the Premier League to do this, there is an element of mercenariness about this. They are going to utilise this to say to independent regulator advocates and to the paper that's coming out from the government, you can water that part down, because look what we can do. We can clean our own house.
Simon,
so there's part of that going on as well.
This phrase you used, financial doping, was something that Arsene Wenger used
towards
Chelsea many years ago. So do we just draw a line of under what Chelsea did? I mean,
they got sanctioned, didn't they?
Are there any They were sanctioned.
Chelsea
and
been
what were
sanctioned.
They were sanctioned.
So that was an example we should look at. So what did they get?
Chelsea got financial sanctions. So did Man City. Man City got sanctioned for 11-12.
that's
They
not
got a
gonna
50
improve
million
anything.
euro fine.
Is it,
Ju-
the
just
number,
pay
is
it,
it the
then.
number of charges,
Slightly.
Simon? The number of charges, I think, is the thing that hits you when you see the rap sheet.
The allegation against Man City is very different from the allegations against other teams. The allegations against Man City that no one's been able to stick is willful misrepresentation. But the idea that they overstated income to be able to achieve certain levels. That is not a case of miscalculation or overspending. That's a case of willful misrepresentation. Now, if that sticks, which is what UEFA stuck it on, UEFA found them guilty. They appealed through the Court of Arbitration of Sport, and because of a series of technicalities, not one of them being time limits about information, they got off. Man City fans jumped up on their pedestal saying, "See, people like Jordan and other people that got even bigger voices, you don't know what you're talking about." And no one believed. Because I then said, well, hang on a second, they haven't answered the Premier League's charges. UEFA do their thing, the Premier League got to do theirs. For the love of God, they've got to have the balls to do it. Now, I never thought they would.
Why is it taking them so long, though? 4 years of an investigation.
Because I don't think there was an appetite to do it. I don't think there was a desire to do it. I think they were looking at it going, how do we do this? Now, look at the landscape. An independent regulator coming in, wanting to dilute all their powers.
On the eve of a regulator, you think that's prompted this?
Oh, I think there's a lot of motivation behind that as well. I don't think that's the only thing, but I think they're going to utilise it for that particular
agenda. It would be quite
agenda.
mad if that is the case, wouldn't it?
Well, it's a cynical
One
world.
of the lines
isn't it?
why we do need a regulator, isn't it?
But to some extent, the threat of a regulator has always been utilisable.
Yeah.
The actual regulation itself, if you go beyond the need to get better governance and distribution, look what a regulator does. It's a recipe for disaster.
I'm seeing some many messages saying, well, if they're guilty, then they've got to face whatever punishment is coming their way.
Isn't it ironic?
Many City fans, incidentally, Simon, coming forward. This is another agenda against City. Why are we not looking back at clubs who were spending vast amount of money, like United, like Chelsea, like Liverpool?
But they did, and they got sanctioned when financial fair play came in. Some of those things that they did previously were not relevant. But the bottom line is this is an interesting one, because isn't it ironic we're now dropping Man City right in their feet, right in the fire, at the time that Chelsea is spending 600 million quid.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I know.
Just to reaffirm this, breaking news coming in all the time here. Manchester City charged by the Premier League this morning with numerous breaches of financial rules following a 4-year investigation. This has been described, as you might imagine, as unprecedented. That's because it is.
Jim White and Simon Jordan. Monday to Friday mornings from 10 on AM, on DAB, via the talkSPORT app and on your smart speaker. talkSPORT.